there everyone, I'm Caroline, the Kick-Ass Professor, and today I'm going to do a lecture on the one issue in doing a degree that seems to unite everyone in panic, and that is you're given a dissertation and you don't know where to start. Hi there again. So, here I am, Kick-Ass Professor, and today I'm going to talk about the fact that you've got a dissertation to do and you don't even know where to start. So, let's cut to the chase and get right on with it. So the first thing to think about when you're given a dissertation that many lecturers and professors in colleges and universities overlook is actually trying to teach students what actually is a dissertation. So, what actually is a dissertation then? Well, a dissertation is what's called a capstone or a final or a culminating project that is a part of most undergraduate degree programs. Wherever you are in the world, whatever degree you're doing, it's almost certain to have a dissertation in it. So that means it's usually in the third or fourth or generally the final year of study. So, having told you a tiny bit about what it is, what else can I tell you? Well, the second thing to remember is that it's an extended piece of work, which means that it's longer. It's a bigger piece of work, taking more time. It's usually worth more credits, although we'll come on to that in a minute. But it's an extended or bigger piece of work, usually between around 8,000 and 12,000 words, although it does vary depending on what degree you're doing and where. So what does it do? Well, it brings together the major skills, knowledge bases, conceptual understanding and processes that you've spent the entire degree acquiring and developing. So in other words, the reason why it's called a capstone project is that it brings together in a culmination of all those things that you've been doing for the last 3 or 4 years. So that includes independent study, researching, critical thinking, critical reading, critical writing, analysing, arguing, and of course, presenting your work in a scholarly fashion. So, having told you a bit about what is a dissertation, are there specific criteria? Well, you all know by now that if you do an essay, if you do a lab project, if you do a practical project, if you do a professional investigation, if you do work-based learning, that there are criteria that you are being measured and marked against for your final grade. So, big question, are there specific criteria for a dissertation as well? And the simple answer is yes, there are. But it's really important that you know what they are. Okay? So the first thing to remember is that dissertations are no different in terms of having criteria. But the criteria are different. So what are they? Well, for most dissertations, you're going to be assessed upon, number 1, your ability to undertake an extensive and extended programme of reading and research. In other words, you're going to be assessed on your ability to read, think, understand and make sense of stuff, whatever that stuff is, whether it's engineering, whether it's social sciences, whether it's architecture, archaeology, whatever it is, you're going to be assessed on your ability to do it. You're also going to be assessed on your ability to demonstrate what's known as intellectual independence and originality. And that means, quite simply, that in a dissertation, you're expected to choose your own subject of study. During your degree, it's almost certain that your tutor or supervisor or lecturers will have helped you a lot in deciding what modules to take, how to approach a lecture, how to actually make sense of particular concepts. Well, in your dissertation, you'll be expected to demonstrate much more intellectual independence. You'll also be assessed on the extent to which you can engage in what's called sustained analysis, and that means your ability to interpret, to compare, to contrast, to think critically about a range of concepts. And last but not least, you're going to be assessed on the extent to which you can present your results and your work is scholarly in terms of its arguments, its structure, and its referencing. There's no good having a fantastic piece of work if when you come to hand it in, it's like something that's a bit of scrotty paper or a tiny little packet of cigarettes that you can't read and that doesn't make sense to anyone. The fact of it is, it's got to be easily accessible by your marker and tutor, and that means that it's got to be presented in a scholarly fashion. So, what is a dissertation actually for then? We know a bit about it, we know what sort of criteria it's got, but why are you doing it? That's a big question, isn't it, for all of us? Why do I have to do this? Well, a dissertation, like it or not, is a piece of work that is actually enabling you to show how you've developed over the whole course of your degree and to show what you're capable of. In a way, it's a bit like showing off what you can do, what you know, what you understand. But really, really, really critically, and this is actually quite exciting, it's a chance for you to determine the focus and direction of your own work. For the first time possibly in your degree, you'll have complete leeway to do what you want to do and, within reason, how you want to do it. So it's a brilliant opportunity to do something that means a lot to you personally. So therefore, it's actually quite important after your degree. It's an opportunity for you to think very, very carefully about what you want to do. So you might do research in something that you want to study or a job that you might want to go into. It's also really useful if you want to take the results or even a copy of your dissertation to a job interview or to an interview for a postgraduate degree. So it's a wonderful opportunity to show what you can do, how you've developed, and to show what you're capable of. So, are there different types of dissertation? You may have heard people talking in the library or in the learning centre or even amongst your peers that there are actually two types of dissertation. Well, you'd be right, there are. One type is called empirical research, also known as field research. The second type is called theoretical research or library-based research, and they're the main type of dissertation. So we've got empirical on one hand and we've got theoretical on the other hand. So what's the difference? Well, there's quite a big difference, and this is the first opportunity for you to start really thinking about what you want to do and what interests you. So, empirical dissertation, what's that? Well, this requires that you'll actually do your own what's called primary research. You'll organise the structure of a research programme, you'll go into a real-life context, that might be a classroom, a workplace, a school, a nursery, a kindergarten, a laboratory, but you'll get out there, you'll get out in the field, actually doing things, and you'll carry out real-life data collection in some form. That might be measuring things, might be talking to people, interviewing people, watching things, all kinds of things. But the really critical key element of an empirical dissertation is that you get out there, you're actually doing the primary research. A theoretical dissertation is not better or worse, it's just different. It's a very, very different type of approach to a dissertation. This involves you constructing an argument, a big idea, a big set of thoughts about something, and that something is usually what's called your thesis question. So your dissertation will actually be an argument that persuades the reader, the tutor, of an answer to that question. So, if empirical is based on field work, getting out there, what's theoretical dissertations based on? Well, they are based on existing literature and studies already carried out, sometimes called secondary literature. So those are the two differences, the main types of dissertation, empirical and theoretical. Keep those in mind and we'll return to them later. So, next big question. We've got lots of answers so far, but we've got lots more questions. And the next big question that my students always ask me is, fantastic, kick-ass professor, they say, wonderful, know all about it, know the differences. But how do I know which one to do then? It's all very well knowing them, but who on earth's going to help me? What was going to tell me which one to do? Well, How can I answer that best? It all depends on what you're really fascinated by, what you really enjoy doing, what you enjoy thinking about, and, critically, what you have access to. If you like finding things out, enjoy getting out and about, like getting out meeting people, like working in the lab, actually doing experiments, measuring things. If you like doing your own research rather than just reading and thinking about others. Plus, and this is really important to think about, there's a concept that I call to my students doability. And doability means, can you actually do it? Can you have access to a school? Can you have access to a women's centre? Can you have access to a lab? Can you have access to a kindergarten? If you can't, well, frankly, you're screwed. So you've got to think about your doability as well as whether or not you really want to do it. If, on the other hand, you like thinking, you like writing, you're fascinated by big ideas, big arguments, big persuasions, logic, you're fascinated by writing techniques, then it might be a good idea for you to think about theoretical dissertation. Okay, let's move on. Right, so what do they both look like then? It's a really good idea to actually think about these simply in terms of what might the chapters look like. So, an empirical dissertation, what might that actually include? Well, quite simply, usually it's got 6 chapters. Now, this is really important. It might be that your tutor or supervisor says that you should combine, for example, your findings and discussion. So you need to check what's expected of you in your criteria. But usually an empirical dissertation has 6 chapters, and they are the introduction, the literature review, the methodology, the findings, the discussion, and last but not least, the conclusion. Simple as. And a real-life empirical study, therefore, might look like this. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about this because you can have a look at this yourself on the presentation, but a real-life example might be a study of caring professors in English schools. So in other words, why would you do something like this? Well, you might be fascinated by how professors actually teach, what they teach, where they teach, and what this means for school teaching. So what would chapter 1 involve? Well, chapter 1 would actually review the nature and significance of the big topic, and in this case, it's caring. Chapter 2 is the literature review. So that would include things like, for example, a discussion of the literature on care theory, philosophy, caring in action in English schools. In other words, surveying the whole area that you're researching. Chapter 3 would include the methodology. So that would have sections on research design, research methods, context of the research, sample, ethical issues, data management, and so on. Literally, how you would plan on doing your research and getting out there. Chapter 4 would be the findings, literally what you've found, the stuff that you've found, whether it's measuring, whether it's talking, whether it's looking, whether it's an ethnography, whatever it is. Chapter 5 has the discussion. In other words, that's then comparing and contrasting your findings in relation to literature. And chapter 6, the final chapter, is the conclusions. And that is, again, stitching all your research together to making sense of it and talking about the implications for future research. So, theoretical dissertations, what might they include? Well, quite by coincidence, they also have 6 chapters. But again, you are advised very strongly to look at your criteria and follow the instructions that your tutor thinks is appropriate. But in general, they have usually 6 chapters. So what are they? Chapter 1 then is what's called setting the broader scene. Chapter 2 is addressing the main subject. That is getting deeper than just the broadest scene into the actual main topic of the dissertation. Chapter 3 is what's called problematizing the subject. Now this is quite an interesting and quite a tricky topic. Problematization is really important in theoretical dissertations, and what it really means is twisting your topic into a question. Now you'll understand more what that means when we move on to the next slide. Chapter 4 means the subject in practice. Theory meets reality. For example, that means looking at the real life implications of what it is that you're discussing. It's not just a theoretical concept. Most theory has a practical implication and practical impact on reality. Chapter 5 is usually a chapter where you give examples of what you've been writing about so far. And chapter 6, again, like the empirical one, is the implications of the subject for theory, maybe future research, future questions, future theoretical concepts to talk about. So, what might a real-life theoretical study look like? Well, for this example, I've chosen something called Hollywood Baroque, a study examining a vision of polyphony for the movies. Now that's a really complex title. But translating this very simply, what it means is it's a study of a particular type of music in the movies. Quite simple. But that shows you something that's really important about dissertations, and that is that however complex your title might be, you need to really carefully think about it to decide what should go into each chapter. So in this case, the chapters might be, for example, the starting chapter, the history of American cinema and its use of music. Now that's a vast topic, vast topic. No dissertation could really satisfactorily study everything to do with music and films. And that's why chapter 2 then looks at something more specific. And that is the particular topic in this case is about Baroque music. That music that was popular and that was written during the 14th, 15th centuries in Europe. The next chapter is about how that type of music waned and waxed and was not popular and then suddenly became popular again in the 60s in American cinema. So again, you can see that if you start off with a wide concept at the start of your dissertation, it's getting narrower and narrower, and that's a really good plan and structure for all dissertations. It gets more and more specific. The next chapter, in this case, is the emergence of a particular musical instrument as an example of Baroque, and that's the harpsichord. And that's again really important in dissertations. You need to somehow make them realistic. It's no good talking about all these ideas and all these concepts that float around and exist out there. We need to know precision. We need to be specific, and that's a really good rule for writing a dissertation. The next chapter, chapter 5, is an analysis and discussion of 2 films. And like with the empirical study, they're examples, real-life examples, where you can actually question whether or not your ideas make sense, and are they good enough. And the last chapter is that you make sense of the whole of what you've written so far to talk about the present and the future of music in American movies. So you can think about a dissertation as kind of like going round in a circle. You start off with a question, you work through it bit by bit, go into examples, and finally you start to bring it all together by finishing exactly where you started, and that is answering the question that you started with. So, once you've decided which type, what do you do next? Well, it's obvious really, isn't it? You need to write your research proposal. But that's where the trouble starts again. So the next presentation will be about writing your research proposal. Thanks Thanks for watching. That's all from Kick-Ass Professor for the moment. I hope you learned a lot from this and it's helped you with your writing. Don't forget, for more details on how to subscribe, go to my webpage and Patreon. Thanks for now. See you all soon. Bye.